The sun hung low over the dry plains, spilling molten gold across the land like a slow-burning fire. Dust drifted lazily in the air, stirred by hooves, boots, and the restless movement of men who had long forgotten what it meant to live gently. The trading post stood like a scar in the middle of nowhere, rough wood, crooked beams, and the constant hum of bargaining, shouting and survival. This was a place where everything had a price: horses, guns, whiskey, and sometimes people. Elias Boone stood just outside the chaos, his shadow stretching long across the dirt. He wasn't there for the noise or the company. He never was. A man carved out of solitude. Elias had spent years building something, steady out of a world that refused to be kind. His ranch wasn't much by most standards, but it was his, quiet, predictable, safe, unlike places like this. He adjusted the brim of his hat, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd without much interest. Deals were being made, arguments rising and falling like waves, laughter cutting through the heat like broken glass. It all felt distant to him, like he was watching a life he no longer belonged to. He had come for supplies. Maybe a new saddle, nothing more. But then, worthless girl. The voice cut through everything. It wasn't just loud, it was cruel. The kind of sound that made people uncomfortable even if they pretended not to care. Elias' gaze shifted. A small crowd had gathered near one of the wooden posts. Some men leaned casually, others stood with arms crossed, and a few simply watched with blank expressions, as if this was just another form of entertainment. At the center of it stood a man barely holding himself upright. His shirt was stained, his beard unkempt, and the smell of cheap whiskey seemed to carry even from a distance. His hand gripped the arm of a young girl so tightly it looked like he might bruise her. "She can't hear!" the man shouted, shaking her slightly as if to prove his point. "Useless. Can't work proper, can't listen, can't do a damn thing right." The girl didn't react. Not to the shouting, not to the rough handling, not even to the laughter that rippled through parts of the crowd. She simply stood there, still, quiet, her head bowed, strands of dark hair falling across her face like a curtain. Her dress was plain, worn thin at the sleeves, and dust clung to the hem. She looked fragile, but there was something else there too. Something harder to name. Elias frowned. He had seen fear before. He had seen broken people. But this wasn't the same. "Sell her cheap," the man went on, his voice cracking with desperation and drink. "I don't need a useless mouth to feed. $50 and she's yours." A few men snorted. "50 for that?" one of them muttered. "Better off buying a lame horse," another joked. More laughter. The girl didn't flinch. Elias felt something stir in his chest, something unfamiliar and unwelcome. He should walk away. This wasn't his business. He knew how the world worked, knew that getting involved in other people's messes usually brought trouble you didn't need, and yet his boots moved before his mind could stop them. The crowd parted slightly as he stepped forward, his presence alone enough to quiet a few voices. Elias wasn't a man known for many things, but the way he carried himself made people think twice before crossing him. How much?" he asked. The drunk man blinked, clearly not expecting anyone to take him seriously. "You deaf too?" He laughed at his own joke. "I said 50. Elias didn't smile. He just stared. And something in that stare made the man's grin falter slightly. Without another word, Elias reached into his coat and pulled out a small cloth pouch. It jingled softly, the unmistakable sound of coins. He held it out. "Done." For a moment the world seemed to pause. The crowd leaned in, curiosity piqued. The drunk man hesitated, his greedy instincts battling whatever scraps of sense he had left. Then with a quick snatch, he grabbed the pouch and weighed it in his hand. His eyes lit up. "Pleasure doing business," he slurred. And just like that, it was over. He released the girl's arm without ceremony. Already turning away, already counting his newfound fortune. Not a goodbye, not a second glance. She was nothing to him anymore. Elias looked at her. Up close, she seemed even smaller. Not weak, but contained, like someone who had learned to make herself invisible to survive. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Elias gestured toward his horse. "Come on!" No response. "Right." He exhaled quietly, adjusting his approach. He stepped toward the horse, placing a hand on the saddle, then looking back at her. A simple invitation. She hesitated, just for a heartbeat. Then slowly she walked toward him. The ride back was long. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of fire and fading light. The world grew quieter the further they moved from the trading post, until the only sounds left were the steady rhythm of hooves and the whisper of wind through dry grass. Elias kept his eyes forward, but his thoughts were anything but steady. What had he just done? He hadn't planned this, hadn't needed it. His life was already full of work, of silence, of routine. There was no place in it for something like this. And yet, he couldn't ignore the image of her standing there, unmoving, unreacting, like she had already accepted whatever fate came her way. He glanced back. She sat behind him, her posture straight but tense, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her gaze was fixed on the horizon, distant and unreadable. Not once had she tried to speak. Not once had she looked afraid. And that unsettled him more than anything. By the time they reached the ranch, the sky had turned deep blue, stars beginning to pierce through the fading light. Elias dismounted first, then turned to help her down. She allowed it, her movements careful, controlled. "This is it," he said, more out of habit than expectation. She didn't respond. Of course. He led her inside. The house was simple, one room, worn but clean. A table, a stove, a bed pushed against the wall. It wasn't much, but it was more than most had. He lit a lantern, the warm glow pushing back the shadows. Then he set out some bread and water. He pointed. "Eat." She watched him for a moment. Then slowly she stepped forward and sat. Her movements were deliberate, almost cautious, as if she expected something to go wrong at any moment. Elias sat across from her, studying her in the flickering light. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. No answer. He nodded to himself, then tapped his chest. "Elias," then pointed at her. A long pause, the kind that stretched just a little too far. And then her lips moved. Soft, barely audible. "Lena." Elias stilled, his breath caught. Did she just... No, he must have imagined it. He leaned back slightly, his mind turning over the moment again and again. Something wasn't right, and for the first time since he brought her home.